Welcome to History with Herodotus, where the tapestry of time unfolds before our very eyes. Today, we embark on a fascinating journey through the tumultuous landscape of 19th century South Africa, as we delve into the complexities of the Boer Wars, a conflict that would shape the destiny of a nation and leave an indelible mark on the world stage. The Boer Wars, spanning from 1880 to 1881, were a series of clashes between the British Empire and the two independent Boer states, the Orange Free State and the South African Republic, also known as Transvaal. To truly grasp the intricacies of this conflict, we must first immerse ourselves in the rich history of the region. The story begins with the arrival of European settlers in South Africa, particularly the Dutch, who established the Cape Colony in the 17th century. Over time, these settlers, known as Boers, developed a distinct culture, language, and identity, shaped by their African environment and their religious beliefs. As the British Empire expanded its reach, it eventually came to control the Cape Colony, leading to tensions between the British authorities and the Boer population, who felt their way of life was under threat. The discovery of diamonds in 1867 and gold in 1886 in the territories controlled by the Boer states drew thousands of newcomers, known as Uitlanders, into the region. This influx of outsiders put a strain on the resources and social fabric of the Boer communities, exacerbating existing tensions with the British. The British, seeing an opportunity to expand their dominion over the lucrative mining areas, began to exert pressure on the Boer states, leading to a series of diplomatic confrontations. One pivotal figure in this narrative is Paul Kruger, a stalwart leader of the South African Republic who would play a crucial role in the events leading up to the war. Kruger's unwavering commitment to the independence of the Boer states and his distrust of British intentions made him a powerful voice against British encroachment. On the British side, figures like Sir Theophilus Shepstone, who annexed the South African Republic in 1877 under the pretext of protecting it from internal strife and external threats, contributed to the escalating tensions. The annexation of the South African Republic by the British in 1877 was a watershed moment. It sparked widespread discontent among the Boers, who saw this act as a blatant disregard for their sovereignty. The British justification for the annexation, based on the need to stabilize the region and protect it from the Zulu threat, did little to alleviate Boer concerns about their future under British rule. The Boers, determined to assert their independence, began to organize themselves militarily, while the British, confident in their superior firepower and organizational capabilities, underestimated the resolve and cunning of their adversaries. It is against this backdrop of rising tensions, political maneuvering, and the quest for dominance that we find ourselves on the cusp of the Boer Wars, a conflict that would test the mettle of both sides and leave a lasting legacy in its wake. The months leading up to the outbreak of hostilities were marked by a series of diplomatic exchanges and military preparations. The Boers, aware of their numerical inferiority, adopted tactics that would exploit the advantages of their familiar terrain and mobilize their commando units, seasoned fighters well versed in guerrilla warfare. Meanwhile, the British, with their disciplined army and advanced weaponry, were poised to assert their control over the rebellious territories, unaware of the fierce resistance they would soon face. As the British Army, led by General Sir George Colley, began its march towards the South African Republic in December 1880, the Boers were ready. On December 20, 1880, a group of about 240 Boer commandos, under the leadership of Nicholas Smit, launched a surprise attack on a British column at Bronkhorstspruit, killing over 250 British soldiers and wounding many more. This decisive victory for the Boers marked the beginning of the First Boer War, and it sent shockwaves throughout the British Empire. The news of the defeat at Bronkhorstspruit reached London on January 6, 1881, and it sparked widespread outrage and demands for revenge. The British government, under Prime Minister William Gladstone, responded by sending more troops to South Africa, determined to crush the Boer rebellion once and for all. However, the Boers were not easily intimidated, and they continued to employ their guerrilla tactics with great success. One of the most significant battles of the war took place on January 28, 1881, at Laing's Nek, a strategic pass in the Drakensberg Mountains. A British force of over 1,200 soldiers, led by General Colley, attempted to capture the pass from a smaller group of Boer commandos. Despite being outnumbered, the Boers held their ground, and after a fierce battle, they emerged victorious, killing or wounding over 160 British soldiers. The defeat at Lying's Neck was a severe blow to British morale, and it marked a turning point in the war. The Boers, emboldened by their successes, began to push the British back on all fronts. On February 8, 1881, a group of Boer commandos, led by Piet Joubert, launched a surprise attack on a British camp at Schwinschukte, killing or wounding over 100 British soldiers. As the war raged on, the British government began to realize that defeating the Boers would not be as easy as they had initially thought. The Boers were skilled fighters, familiar with the terrain, and determined to defend their land against all odds. In a letter to his wife, written on February 12, 1881, General Colley expressed his admiration for the Boers, saying, "They are a wonderful people, and I have never seen anything like them. They are as brave as lions and as cunning as foxes." Despite their bravery and cunning, the Boers were ultimately outnumbered and outgunned. On February 27, 1881, a large British force, led by General Sir Evelyn Wood, defeated a group of Boer commandos at the Battle of Elandslaagte, killing or wounding over 50 Boers. This victory marked a significant shift in the balance of power in favor of the British, and it paved the way for their eventual triumph. However, the Boers refused to give up, and they continued to fight on, employing their guerrilla tactics with great success. On March 6, 1881, a group of Boer commandos led by Lucas Meyer launched a surprise attack on a British column at Piet Retief's farm, killing or wounding over 20 British soldiers. This daring raid was just one example of the many small-scale battles that took place during the war, and it demonstrated the Boers' ability to adapt and evolve in response to changing circumstances. As the war dragged on, both sides suffered heavy losses, and the conflict began to take a toll on the civilian population. Many Boer families were forced to flee their homes, seeking refuge in neighboring territories or in makeshift camps. The British, too, suffered significant casualties, and their army was stretched to the limit as they struggled to maintain control over the rebellious territories. The months of March and April 1881 were marked by a series of intense battles as both sides clashed in a desperate bid for victory. On March 23, 1881, a British force led by General Wood defeated a group of Boer commandos at the Battle of Kambula, killing or wounding over 100 Boers. However, the Boers quickly regrouped and launched a counterattack, forcing the British to retreat. As the war entered its final phase, the British government began to reassess its strategy. On April 5, 1881, Prime Minister Gladstone announced that he would be sending a new commander, General Sir Frederick Roberts, to take charge of the British Army in South Africa. Roberts was a seasoned veteran of colonial wars, and he was determined to bring the conflict to a swift and decisive end. Under Roberts' leadership, the British Army launched a series of bold attacks against the Boer positions, using their superior firepower and numbers to overwhelm the enemy. On May 3, 1881, a British force, led by General Roberts, defeated a group of Boer commandos at the Battle of Pretoria, killing or wounding over 200 Boers. This decisive victory marked the beginning of the end of the First Boer War, and it paved the way for the eventual defeat of the Boer Rebellion. As the British Army closed in on the Boer strongholds, the rebels began to lose heart. On May 10, 1881, a group of Boer leaders, including Piet Joubert and Nicholas Smit, met with General Roberts to discuss surrender terms. After several days of negotiations, the Boers agreed to lay down their arms, and on May 15, 1881, the First Boer War came to an end. The Treaty of Pretoria, signed on March 23, 1881, but not ratified until May 15, 1881, marked the official end of the war. The treaty recognized the independence of the South African Republic, but also imposed certain conditions on the Boers, including the requirement that they disarm and accept British control over their foreign policy. The Boers, exhausted and defeated, had little choice but to accept the terms, and they reluctantly agreed to the treaty. The Treaty of Pretoria marked a significant turning point in the history of South Africa, as it recognized the independence of the South African Republic, but also imposed certain conditions on the Boers. The treaty's provisions, including the requirement that the Boers disarm and accept British control over their foreign policy, would have far-reaching consequences for the region. As the Boers began to rebuild and recover from the devastating effects of the war, they faced numerous challenges in asserting their independence and self-governance. In the years following the treaty, the South African Republic struggled to maintain its sovereignty, as British influence and control continued to shape the region's politics and economy. The discovery of gold in the Witwatersrand region in 1886 would further complicate the situation, as thousands of British miners and settlers flocked to the area, leading to tensions between the Boers and the British. As the Boer statesman Paul Kruger noted, "The British government has always tried to strangle our independence, and now they are using the goldfields as a pretext to interfere in our affairs." Despite these challenges, the legacy of the First Boer War continued to shape the course of South African history. This conflict would prove even more devastating than the first, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians, and ultimately leading to the defeat of the Boer republics and the establishment of British control over South Africa. Today, the First Boer War is remembered as a pivotal moment in the history of South Africa, marking the beginning of a long and complex struggle for independence and self-governance. The war's legacy can be seen in the many museums, memorials, and historical sites that dot the South African landscape, each serving as a testament to the bravery and sacrifice of those who fought in the conflict. As historian Thomas Pakenham has noted, the Boer Wars were a defining moment in the history of South Africa, shaping the course of the country's development and leaving a lasting impact on its people and culture. The First Boer War also had significant implications for the British Empire, highlighting the challenges and complexities of maintaining control over distant colonies and territories. The war marked a turning point in the development of British imperialism, as policymakers began to reassess the costs and benefits of maintaining a vast and sprawling empire. As the British historian Niall Ferguson has observed, the Boer Wars were a wake-up call for the British Empire, forcing policymakers to confront the reality of their own limitations and vulnerabilities. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, remember that, to understand the present, we must first understand the past.